Welcome back, warriors. Kwe Tanse Sego Anibuju. I am the host of this show, The Warrior Life. This podcast is a show about living the warrior life, a lifestyle that focuses on decolonizing our minds, bodies, and spirits, while at the same time revitalizing our languages, cultures, traditions, laws, and governing practices. And it's also about asserting, living, and defending our sovereignty all over Turtle Island. And today's podcast / YouTube video is a really special panel of chiefs from New Brunswick who will help give us some important context about what's been happening in New Brunswick lately. From police killings of First Nations people during the pandemic, the province's refusal to hold a full-blown inquiry specifically into anti-First Nation racism, the RCMP raid on First Nations-based businesses, and now the province's notice that they're going to be canceling the First Nation tax agreements. The relationship doesn't seem to be moving in the right direction. And I am so honored to be able to introduce these chiefs, all of whom I have a great deal of respect for and who work very hard. They work for First Nations that represent both the Mi'kmaw and Wolastoqey Nations in our territories. So first of all, let me introduce Sakom Chief Allan Polchies Jr. He has been the chief of St. Mary's First Nation in Fredericton since 2018, and he's someone that I've known for a really long time and admire for all of his work. Before that, he was a councillor for 13 years and has always been super involved at the community level. His First Nation in particular is part of the larger Wolastoqey Nation. Next, we have Chief Patricia Bernard, who's been the chief of Madawaska Maliseet First Nation since 2013. Before that, she served as councillor for 6 years, and she's also a lawyer. She was called to the bar in 2000. Her First Nation is also part of the larger Wolastoqey First Nation, and I have known Trish, Chief Bernard, for a very long time. She's literally worked in everything. She's worked for government, she's worked on land claims, and she's one of those chiefs that reaches out and helps other people on the issues that they're working on. Next, we have Chief Sacha LaBillois, who has been the chief of Ugpi'ganjig, also known as Eel River Bar First Nation, since 2019. She had the privilege of becoming elected just before the pandemic. But before then, she also served as a councillor and has always worked on economic development. And I have to say proudly that she is my chief of my community. And our First Nation is part of the larger Mi'kmaw Nation. And of course, last but not least, we have Chief Bill Ward, who has served as the chief of Metepenagiag, also known as Red Bank First Nation, since 2015. On Twitter, you'll note that he describes himself as not only the youngest chief in the Atlantic region, but the coolest. His First Nation is also part of the larger Mi'kmaw Nation. So we have an awesome representation today of North and South and Mi'kmaw and Maliseet, and some of the best chiefs that I have ever had the pleasure of knowing and working with. Thank you all for giving your time to come on to this panel today and give us some updates about what's happening in New Brunswick. But before we jump into all of the issues that are happening, I'm wondering if each of you would like a little bit of time to introduce yourself the way that you like to, and perhaps some background on your First Nation. And perhaps we can start with you, Chief Bernard.
Sure. I am a Wolastoqey woman. I'm a mother, a grandmother, a wife, a daughter, and a sister. And I come from a small community in northwestern New Brunswick, which is on the boundary, the international boundary with the state of Maine. And we're actually close to the border of Quebec as well. And our community is just under 600 members that are spread across North America. And we have about 250 on reserve. So yeah, that's where I'm from.
That's fantastic. Well, let's just keep it within the Wolastoqey Nation. Chief Polchies, maybe you could introduce yourself as well.
Kwe Dungaklu Gil, Niltaliwas Sakom Polchies, Chief Allan Polchies from the Wolastoqey territory. St. Mary's First Nation, Sedungstas, is the name of my community. My community is an urban community. We are located in the capital of New Brunswick, which is Fredericton, New Brunswick. I always say that Fredericton is a suburb of St. Mary's First Nations. And that's quite important when we're building relationships, for sure, because multiple levels of relationships that we're building here. I have about 2,000 band members that are part of my band. I have 1,200 band members that are living in the community. I have a community that is certainly, focused on economic development and, providing jobs. I am one of the largest employers on the Fredericton's north side. I've got about over 400 employees in my community. And of course, I'm a proud father of a 6-year-old, me and my partner. I am two-spirited, and I'm a big champion of Every Child Matters. And I'm certainly glad to be here today with you, Pam, Wolastoqey, for doing this. And I'm excited to share with all of you in Turtle Island.
Oh, fantastic. I love that. Fredericton being a suburb of St. Mary's. Yeah, of course. They're all suburbs of our territories. Okay, over to you, Chief LaBillois.
Quite, Pam. Well, Maliseet. Good afternoon. Daluizi Sacha LaBillois. Nina Sakom, Dalewi Ugpi'ganjig. My name is Sacha LaBillois. I'm the chief here, and I'm from Eel River Bar. We're located in northern New Brunswick. We're also a small community. There's about 750 band members. About half of that reside on reserve. We're fortunate to be located in front of one of the most beautiful bays of the world. I'm happy to be here on your podcast today. A little bit about myself. I'm a mom of 4 boys. I'm a wife. I have 3 sisters. Come from a strong line of Mi'kmaw women, and that's it, really. Wolastoqey Nation. I'm happy to be here today. Thank you.
I'm so happy because we got to have you twice. For those of you who don't know, we interviewed Chief Sacha on her own specific podcast, and hopefully I'll get to the rest of you two as well. And last but not least, the youngest and the coolest chief, allegedly, in New Brunswick, Chief Ward.
Hi, I'm Chief Bill Ward of Metepenagiag. The title of coolest chief was self-proclaimed. I did specify that in the bio, so any chief can dispute that if they'd like. Here at Metepenagiag, we have about 700 members, on the cusp of 700 members, with about 450 living here in the community. Metepenagiag, as many people know, is one of the oldest continuously occupied community or village in the entirety of New Brunswick. History dating back here of our people over 3,000 years, and I'm proud to be representing them and the people here today. I've been chief since 2015. I was a councillor for a year before that. At that time I took over, I was 29. So it was quite young here to do that here in the community, for sure. And I'm just grateful for all the support that people have given me and the leadership. They trusted my leadership over the past few years, and hopefully to continue on. I'm very happy to be here today to talk to everybody and share some thoughts and ideas. And like I said, if anybody wants to try to take the title of coolest chief from me, then come try it. So
oh no, the gauntlet has been thrown down.
That sounds like a challenge.
That's so awesome. Well, before we get into the issues, there's a lot of non-native people that watch these videos or listen to the podcasts, and they don't really understand the kind of work that goes into being, in a First Nation government, being chief and council. And I was wondering if each one of you could just speak a little bit about, what are some of the challenges, but also some of the rewarding parts about what it is you do as chief with your councils in terms of governing your territories. And maybe we'll just kind of go in the same order, Chief Bernard.
Sure. Being a chief, it's a question I've gotten before. What are the challenges and what it's like? And I always like to say it's such a wide variety of responsibility that one day, in a day, you could be sitting and negotiating multi-million-dollar deals, and later that day, you're dealing with somebody's cat pooping in somebody else's yard. So the variety and scope is so broad that it can be quite a challenge to be able to deal with all of the issues in any particular given day, as well as, you're supposed to be available all the time. And it's important that as a chief, you have to make a little bit of time for yourself to stay healed. And because it can be quite a stressful job at times. But yeah, no, it's really been such a rewarding experience for me, particularly in the governance sector, because we have the ability to make real substantial change as leaders. And this is something that I've really prided myself on, particularly when it comes to governing, being fair, putting the community first and our nation first. And that's always such a rewarding thing when you can get things done, to be able to succeed. Like, for example, we've successfully gotten out of many sections of the Indian Act under the Land Management Act and developed our own land code. And with that has been a great reward in being able to control the land that we are on reserve. And that makes a big difference when it comes to, getting out the middleman, getting out the Canadian government in dealing with land use and protection, environment, and things of that nature. So it's been a great challenging job, but at the same time, it can be quite stressful, long hours, but it's worth it.
Okay, well, Chief Polchies, because people really have no concept of what chiefs and councillors have to do in their communities.
Yes, most certainly. There's over 600 First Nation communities in Turtle Island here in our home land in Canada. And, I applaud every single leader in the First Nation communities, first of all, that, take up the challenge itself, because it is challenging. But as I always say, Pam, there's always more successes than there is challenges. We as Indigenous people, we have a long history of, residential school and Indian day school, and there's lots of trauma, intergenerational trauma that we've overcome. We're in the 21st century, and we're more, our people are educated and they're creative, and we've got lots of entrepreneurs, and people just want to be successful and have healthy lives and do good, and have good morals and values. As a leader of a community of my size, certainly there's a number of challenges. As we all know, there's certainly one of the challenges is that everyone wants a piece of the chief, right? And when I speak of that, everyone wants your ear. And to be a good chief, you need to be a great listener, because that's what it's all about, is listening to the people, because the people had faith in you and elected you into those roles. But because of all the files that we are responsible for, it becomes very challenging, because our funding arrangements that we have in place only allows us to hire so many staff. Where we are a full government running, we're our own nation, and we're trying to implement policies and procedures, and we're trying to implement good programs and services, and we've got lots of challenges when it comes to those particular avenues. Time management is something that as a chief, you need to manage your time in dealing with your community, dealing with the number of levels of government, dealing with your own family. For me, I've certainly learned I'm learning to balance. As I mentioned into my introduction, I'm a dad, and I've got a family, of course, and of course, it's a larger community that you become responsible for. you wear many hats, as we all know. One day, you could be, people are approaching you about housing issues, or you get inquiries about education, or you're dealing with, undesirables in the community. It's just every single minute and hour, it changes. And the thing is, being a First Nation leader, a chief, is that you're on 24/7. When things happen in the community, you're the first to know, you're expected to deal with it, and, everyone comes to you. So it's not like you get to, 9 to 5 and you get to go home. You are constantly on. So those are some of the challenges. But the rewards, of course, is, having the passion. Having the passion to help our people. When I say my people, of course, I'm going to be biased. I think, I've got great, my community is the best community, but collectively, we're all in this together. What I'm so proud to stand with my brothers and sisters in the Mi'kmaw and in the Mi'kmaw territory, in our own territory, is that collectively we're standing together and we're trying to move big files. I think that the other reward is when you have a vision and you share the vision with your people, and they're on side with your vision, and you see it play out, and you really see the rewards, and it just sort of like it makes you feel a little accomplished when your community is happy. One of the best rewards is that when I go to homes and visit and stuff, they're always rolling out food, and believe it or not, Pam, I love to eat. I love to eat because it certainly is a gift to my spirit. To my spirit, to be nourished, to help my people is where I'm going on that. So here, but one of the rewards for me is being the voice, especially for those young people that don't have a voice yet, for those little kids that we need to speak for. I always remind the leaders at the table, whether I'm dealing with First Nation leaders or, the municipalities or the provincial or federal government, we are their voice. We are the ones that have to carry their voice and plan for the children that are yet unborn. So certainly, it's that's one of the best rewards, in knowing that someday, all the work that I'm doing will be left behind, and I'm paving that path for my next successor, and of course all the children of the 7 generations.
Of course, and food. I mean, who doesn't love going to community powwows and community events and meetings? I mean, I've even gone to referendums, and there's a full buffet at the referendum. So
right.
That's so awesome. And this conversation sounds just like the one that Chief LaBillois and I had, because even though she got elected right before the pandemic, she was also about, community and a vision and being available for people. And that was one of the things that I like most about my chief, that she's available. She talks to people and she gives information. Yeah. So Chief LaBillois, what are some of the challenges and benefits of being a leader in your community?
It's hard to answer. But I can certainly touch on some areas that have been challenging, and the other 2 chiefs already touched on them. But one that stands out to me is like when I'm trying to balance our traditional ways with the Western ways. So when we talk about 2-eyed seeing, and it comes into, I'll say like policy implementation here. We want to have strong governance. We want to move forward, but sometimes we have to take a little step back and look at things that affect us differently. There's just so much to balance as a chief. We're not like a typical municipality mayor and council where they get a certain budget from their taxation and they have to take care of their infrastructure. As chiefs of our communities, if there's something that's needed around mental health, well, we need to figure out how to fix it. We need to identify the dollars to offer the programming that's needed. Our culture, our language, our education, we're all about building our nation. So we need our own institutions. We need our language. but we're always challenged on how to do this because we're limited on how we operate. Can we keep up with the speed of business like in the Western world when we're limited to the rules and regulations around ATRs or land designation? There's just so many issues, and to have that listening ear and have, compassion all the time. It just requires like a certain level of patience and calmness and overall trying to not have stress within your own life, which is always a challenge when you're dealing with so many issues. Like there was mention of doing business deals and having to worry about other things, but it could be that we just were told our tax agreements were canceled, but an elder just passed away. So where does the focus go, right? It's always a balancing act. Some of the most rewarding things for me is when you put an idea or a vision together and you can bring it from conception and design to reality, and just to see the satisfaction from community members to take a snapshot and then take it again 1 year later and be able to see the positive growth. You see tangible growth. That's really rewarding. Things like that.
Well, there's so much going on. I don't think people realize that First Nations do everything municipal governments, provincial governments, and federal governments do with a mere fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percentage of the funds to do it. So, Chief Ward, over to you.
It's more or less echoing a lot of what the other chiefs had said. Time management is huge. Balancing your work and personal life is huge. I have 2 young daughters at home, but the duties of the chief seem to be 24/7, like Chief Allan had said, and that's even more true now, thanks to the invention of Facebook Messenger and the ability for anybody to just add and send you a message at whatever time works for them, I guess, and not so much for you. But if you want to stay engaged with your people, and if you have that genuine compassion for your band members, then you will take that time to answer them or try to get back to them at some point. And a lot of the times you're sacrificing other time, and that's either your personal time or your family time. But if you truly do care, it will bother you if you don't answer them. So there's that catch-22 of that all. As a chief, I think Chief Trish said it perfect, where you're dealing with something so minor, and then you're going to deal with something quite large that can have huge impacts for the community. You're being stretched. That can all happen within the same morning, so it becomes difficult to be able to stay on all these different things and to prioritize what's more important or what isn't more important. But to each person that's coming for you with these requests, that's important to them. So you got to be able to see at their level and try to come down and I guess try to resolve the issue for them, which sometimes is very challenging. That's just band members though, and and some of the stuff that we have to do. I think everybody realizes that comes with the job, and as a chief, you're overseeing all the programming that's going on in the community. You're expected to have some higher level of understanding of all of the different departments and initiatives that the departments are working on, so that community members can ask you a question and get answers to. So it takes a lot of time, a lot of dedication to be a chief, I would say. It's not for everybody. I can also say that over the years I've learned slowly through experience that it's hard to keep everybody happy. There's, for every decision that you make, you're going to make some people happy, but you may make people angry or sad or something. So Once you realize that, though, and you try to, I guess, minimize any damages or anything ill, even though there's no intention there, you get a better sense of things, I guess, and trying to work with the people. But I know now that the biggest challenges I see they're facing is dealing with the government and dealing with the province and dealing with the federal government. It seems as though they want to keep us in this box that they created, and it's very difficult to get out of, because back then when they made all these rules and kept us in these boxes, they never expected us to grow to the capacity we're at now. They never expected us to become educated and to have the resources that we have now. And so it's a fight to get out of these constructs they made for us, and they want to keep us here. But in order for us to grow and to do well and to prosper our communities, we have to break through. And they definitely have been one of the biggest challenges, I know, for my community, for sure. Some of the rewarding parts, I guess, is, I was a big advocate for youth when I had run. I was the youngest person running at the time when I was on council, and growing up in the community, there was never really much for the youth to do. And you see a lot of young folks go, and in my age group, and a few people a little bit older and younger than me, go to the wayside just because they had nothing to do. There's only certain things to do, and that was party or, stuff that wasn't healthy. And so I took it upon myself to really push a lot of things for the youth and infrastructure, especially. So what's rewarding is to see when you invest that money into community infrastructure for the youth. Like we have a community swimming pool, we revamped our baseball field and everything like that. So when you drive by those places and you see kids using it and are there every day, that's rewarding to know that you're making an impact on their life. You're giving them something to do. They're not staying idle, and it's really rewarding. And that's the kinds of things that I kind of want to see more of, I guess. And there's the intangible too, is when you make different policy changes, especially in regards to employment or work, and you start seeing the progress and the work ethic really increase, the productivity of members and staff members really increase over the time of policy change. I mean, it's a hard thing to, it's not one of those things you put out there and, you get a big hurrah from the community. But when it works, it's nice to see.
So one of the things that I think people really don't appreciate is the role of chiefs and councils. They are elected to serve communities who have been devastated by colonization, not just the intergenerational trauma, but the ongoing racism in society, violence in society. And there's not really a full appreciation for the importance and focus that chiefs have to put on economic development because of the dispossession of our lands and resources. I mean, we would be all wealthy in our own territories. We wouldn't even be having these conversations had there been respect for treaty rights, Aboriginal rights, our title rights, all of our ownership over these resources. And so First Nations are in a position where, of course, we have to do economic development, and we try everything possible, both traditional, related to traditional practices and current practices. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to all of you today about some of the things that are impacting First Nations, particularly in New Brunswick. And so, you had, and shockingly enough, during the pandemic, when most people were isolating at home and there was supposed to be less interaction, you had multiple police killings of First Nations people all across the country, but particularly in New Brunswick, in very short order over a short period of time. And the corresponding request by the chiefs to have a full-blown, specific inquiry, investigation into what happened. And I'm wondering, Chief Ward, if you can talk about the request to have this and why this hasn't come to fruition.
Obviously, it was quite disappointing to see them gut the motion and throw it to the wayside. And, obviously they did not want to do it, regardless of the pressure that they had from opposition parties and other MLAs. It's hard to say what exactly, but I think there's a few things there. Unfortunately, the Premier is a big part of that. His claims that it may cost too much. There's so many recommendations already on the table. It may take long. Nothing can, lots of different excuses. But at the end of the day, to be frank, having an inquiry into anti-First Nations racism does not cater to his conservative base. If you see a lot of the things that the Premier is doing especially in the past few months when he gained his majority, he's not friendly to First Nations. I have the same feeling from the Francophones. He caters to his base, and that's the way he wants to keep it. The thing about doing an inquiry into racism is that you're going to be looking at a lot of different places that support him, like police, and in his own office as well. It's hard to have those conversations because they are going to be tough conversations, and they are going to be opening a lot of eyes into it and the treatment of our people. And it may be disgusting to some people to see the way that we were treated or the way that we were worked around and not taken seriously. So here in my community, especially after the killing of Rodney, there's definitely a huge distrust for police and the RCMP. It's going to take a while for us to get over that. And we felt that by having this inquiry, it would start to begin to mend the relationship between us, the police, and the province. But obviously they did not want to do it. And as their actions continue on here, since he gained his majority, they're not making any attempt to build that relationship or mend that relationship. So I'm not going to hold my breath, that's for sure.
Keeping on the theme of policing, the RCMP has also recently engaged in what the Mi'kmaw chiefs have called an unlawful raid on a dispensary at my home community of Eel River Bar First Nation. And I'm wondering, Chief LaBillois, if you can tell us a little bit about what happened and what are the core issues at play here?
Sure. So basically, there was individually owned cannabis store here in Eel River Bar that was raided by RCMP not that long ago. The Mi'kmaw chiefs have termed this as an unlawful raid due to the fact that we had signed a BCR in support of each community to put in place their own rules and regulations around the sale of cannabis in their communities. So, okay, that happened. But I need to go back a little bit before cannabis was legalized in Canada and in New Brunswick. There's a duty to consult with us as First Nations. This has never happened. In New Brunswick, the provincial government had put on several information sessions and invited First Nations in and called it engagement. What they did was they provided a nice little slideshow on how legalization was to take place in New Brunswick. And there was really no place for the First Nations to participate in the retail industry. So the government said, sure, you can participate if you want to be a licensed producer. Well, not every First Nations has tens of millions or even the amount of money required to start up, medically licensed manufacturing plants such as the Zenabis. We don't have that. We don't have that capacity. There's a couple hundred of these producers that are waiting for licensing. So it's just not that easy to participate in this industry. So right from the beginning, the province has been monopolizing this industry. We as First Nations are going to exercise our right to self-government, and we are going to sell cannabis in our communities. Several of us are doing it. As far as Eel River Bar or Ugpi'ganjig, on April 20th, a few days ago, our council ratified bylaws that will support a community store and individual entrepreneurs who wish to be licensed to sell cannabis here in Eel River Bar. We're strengthening our position. I guess I like to focus on the picture forward because we need to be financially stable. There's never enough money to fund all the programs that we need for our people. And it's a way for us to support our communities.
And that's so important because what you're talking about is our inherent sovereignty, power, authority, jurisdiction to govern ourselves according to our own laws in our own territories based on, you know, our own consent that we get from our own people to do these things. And so, you know, however it is that it's happening, you've got governments historically all over the country who, you know, they don't want you to engage in your own traditional practices. There's a whole bunch of regulations. You think about all the court cases around things like hunting and fishing, but they don't want you to engage in modern economies because then, you know, you're taking a piece of what they consider to be their pie. They don't carve out a space for what is technically in the Maritimes. It's all of our territory and it's all of our resources. And I'm wondering, Chief Bernard, if you can talk a little bit about, you know, that issue around the failure to share our own lands and resources in a fair way, recognizing that we're in fact the owners.
Yes, exactly. And that's really, this goes back historically, because I mean, if you go back to when Canada became a country and the division of responsibilities between the federal government and the provincial government, forestry, these types of things were considered provincial, and Indians and lands reserved for Indians were federal. So historically, New Brunswick has always kind of ignored First Nations based on that principle in the Constitution that, hey, Indians, that's a federal responsibility. Forestry is provincial. Therefore, First Nations don't have access to forestry without our permission, the provincial permission, so to speak. And this has always been has been flawed because we go back historically to the peace and friendship treaties where we've never ceded this territory. We've never ceded this land. So everything upon it is ultimately ours. And we ultimately have the title and access to those resources, despite whatever the Constitution says with respect to the division of responsibility. So we've historically been denied access to those industries like forestry, mining. Fisheries has always been a little bit of an anomaly because the federal fisheries is along the lines of the federal responsibility with respect to commercial fisheries, but then inland waters has always been there's an overlap. So all of these things where we've had access to be able to participate in and become partners has always been denied particularly by the province. Now, as you know, last fall the Wolastoqey came together and started a title claim, and that is going to have huge ramifications for the province when it comes to sharing these natural resources that we have a right to. We have title, and we have Aboriginal rights, and we have treaty rights, and these have constantly and continuously been denied and ignored by the province. So really, this has been a huge concern and an issue for us because we don't have an access to that revenue source to be self-governing. We don't want to rely on the federal government or the provincial government. We just want what's rightfully ours to be able to access and earn a livelihood off of it and live a good standard of living. We don't intend to be billionaires like the Irvings. We want to live in a great standard of living, and that's not too much to ask for. So it's being denied these access to these resources has really created a situation for us to to be creative, and these tax agreements that recently have been given notice to cancel have been a means to sort of do that. And it's just too bad that this has had to happen. But like I say, we have access to, we have a right to those resources, and I think we're going to see that unfold much more clear in the future.
And I'm so glad you raised that, because you hear uninformed commentary in the media or even in society, around stop asking for handouts. And, people need to be reminded, we're just asking for a small part of our land's resources and all of the wealth that's collected on our lands. So even if we only had the tiniest fraction of all of the fees, fines, permits, money that's being made, royalties that are being made, like you name it. There's billions and trillions of dollars being made all over Canada that First Nations don't have access to, but it's all on our territories. I think people need to remember that and, come to the table, because First Nations have always said, look, we just want to come to the table in a good way, in respect of the treaties, because we didn't surrender or cede anything, by the way. And, it would serve New Brunswick well to remember it's all unceded territory, and things like comprehensive land claims hopefully will address that. This also goes to the issue of all of the ways in which we provide funding to our communities, and those tax agreements that have recently got media attention are something that not everybody understands. And I'm wondering, Chief Polchies, if you can just explain a little bit about what are those tax agreements, and then what happened? Why did the province give notice that they're pulling out?
Well, first of all, I'd like to look at them as revenue sharing, because ultimately that's what it is. There's some history here in New Brunswick on the tax agreement that the government likes to use their terminology, but I'll refer to it as a revenue sharing agreement. Back in 2017, the Wolastoqey Chiefs, of course, the Wolastoqey Chiefs renegotiated the tax agreement for our communities, where we would collect, all the communities would collect tax being paid on goods sold in the community, and then we would remit those taxes back to the province of New Brunswick, where they then would take 95% of that and return it back to the community, and they would keep 5%. It's a whole system of being in control of our resources again. And this is where, we need to be creative in how we do that moving forward. Because as Chief Trish mentioned, they certainly affect on a number of levels, in terms of we use those funds to use for shortfalls in our programs and services. So, the agreement was for 10 years. So up to the 5th year, there was a clause, a caveat in there that the government can open it to renegotiate, or the First Nations could, or it could be left alone, and then of course can fulfill its term. Well, recently there was the Wolastoqey Chiefs had challenged the province of New Brunswick on a carbon tax fuel, where they weren't going to be willing to share. That wasn't originally in the agreement, and we said it needs to be in the agreement because of the fuel tax that is coming down from the federal government. So we challenged the province government because they said no, they weren't going to include that, and we won. The judge sided with us, and then of course, we went back to the table. So I think this is what has sparked the Premier to look at those revenue sharing or tax agreements and announce that he's going to cancel them. But there is an agreement. There's clauses there that state that he can't look at them. Either party can't look at them until January 2022. So we're challenging that situation at the moment. But if I can share with all of your viewers, Pam, that the important thing is fact checking. check the facts that, what the government or what the premier is stating in these press releases or his briefings that he's given live. Some of the information is not correct. We need to, we as Indigenous leaders are ensuring that Canadians are getting the correct narrative. And, really the bottom line on unfortunate situation where, we're trying to do, 2 steps, every time we get 2 steps ahead, we always get 3 steps back per se, right? So.
Because there really was a problematic narrative that was coming directly from the province. They were saying things like, operating First Nation businesses according to your own laws or resource revenue sharing agreements, that these are unfair to other businesses, which is really just a dog whistle for, we don't want to respect your basic rights, which we only recognize in the most limited way. And I've always been concerned about the kind of misinformation that it miseducates the public. And then so if someone's watching mainstream media and they hear these things, then they're like, well, if our government's saying it, it must be true. That's unfair. Well, I don't want those First Nations doing these things without really understanding any of the facts. And so you raise a really important point, around the facts of this and the impact that it would have.
Well, the issue is talking about tax versus revenue sharing is because the terminology that the government wants to use is using that in a term of how all New Brunswickers or Canadians saying, well, they don't pay taxes, and yes, we do. I'm going to clarify, we pay taxes. My community pays tons of taxes and contributes tens of millions of dollars to the economy. As I was mentioning into my opening, I'm in an urban setting. Fredericton is in my backyard. I build, we run stores. We have all kinds of operations where we're providing and purchasing items from our non-Indigenous friends. So revenue sharing, where people may have, it has a different tone to it. And, we're going back to, we're students of the lands and, our people were here first. So we need to share those revenues. So I think their tactics on calling it a tax, of course, it has a negative tone to it.
There's always those stereotypes. First of all, we actually have protected rights around treaties, customs duties, not just at the border, but under the Indian Act. So even the recognition of those rights shouldn't be considered a negative thing. But your point around resource revenue sharing is also important because we don't even get a fraction, like not even a fraction of a percent of the wealth in this territory.
The thing about the Higgs and the things that he's saying, in regards to revenue sharing across Canada, every province has something that they're sharing with the First Nations or at least trying to when it comes to resources or gaming or what have you. But, here in New Brunswick, they decide to share the tax. So to say that a revenue sharing agreement is unique or just unique or to New Brunswick, it's untrue. Other provinces are doing it, but he did spread a lot of misinformation on the tax agreements and calling them unfair. Unfair to who? Has he come to our communities and seen our communities and see some of the conditions that our people have to live in? Who is it unfair to? You can't mention First Nations and say that we get an unfair advantage over anybody else. And a lot of these things that he's brought up are addressed right in the tax agreements when it comes to competition and pricing. It's all in the agreements that we can't compete with so-and-so. We can't lower our price of gas or cigarettes or anything else like that, especially in regards to gas, whoever's within the close proximity to us. So what is true and fair competition? The best we can do is match. He also had mentioned that taxes, when people come to the First Nations and First Nation businesses and spend their money, that business is not collecting provincial tax or people aren't paying provincial tax. It's untrue. They're still paying the tax. And that money gets sent to the province, and then the province sends it back to the band, not to the business. They send it back to the band. So to say that there's some sort of unfair advantage is just absurd. And if he had read the agreements himself, he would have first realized that, you know, all the issues he had in 2014 leading into now have been addressed in the 2017 agreement. And you know, even the simplest thing on the cancellation of the 5-year renewal on the new agreements, he would have known that that can't be truly canceled until 2023. So I think Higgs reacted emotionally and vindictively when they had lost the carbon tax case to the Maliseet, and his punishment was to take these away. So it's unfortunate. He does not want to, I guess, read the agreements or learn of why they're around, and the benefits that has to all the communities, and especially in some of our communities are around small towns like Miramichi here, and Edmundston up in the northwestern part of the province. You know, they really rely on the First Nations communities to keep them afloat and economically. So there can be definitely some repercussions for canceling these that would hurt, you know, all these other places and communities that have nothing to do with this. So it's just very, very unsettling to see the Premier act in such a manner.
Yeah, I think just to echo what Chief Ward is saying, when the Premier is saying that these agreements are unfair, that could be nothing further from the truth, because in fact they were created to create fairness, because First Nations are not on provincial land. We are on federal land, the reserves. And there's nothing to stop us from creating our own taxation regime, which could be, instead of the 15% HST, what if we decide to make a First Nations tax, goods and services tax of 10%? Well, the local businesses would be livid if this happened, because that would create an unfair advantage. And so the whole purpose of these agreements were to create a level of fairness for the consumer, to not have a place to go where they could get cheaper goods because the tax is cheaper there. And that is really where the problem lies, because the government in the 1990s, when these tax agreements were created, had no idea that we would be so entrepreneurial and push and take advantage of these agreements to our benefit, because we don't have access to forestry and we don't have access to mining or other natural resources. So let's maximize what we've agreed to, and in fact, because our community is surrounded by a municipality as well as St. Mary's, the city loves us because we grow the economy here, and they want to make sure that the businesses within the city of Edmundston are at a fair playing field as those businesses that are on the First Nation. Because if these tax agreements go away and we do create our own regime, there's nothing guaranteeing that we're going to decide to charge 15%. We could charge less, and that's going to cause this whole problem to raise its head again that happened in the 90s, where people were coming onto reserve and purchasing goods completely tax-free.
Like, I think in addition to talking about these tax agreements, or I'll say revenue sharing agreements not being fair, our Premier used the word that they weren't sustainable for the province. But the irony here is that we're generating economic development, we're generating revenues for ourselves, and in return, generating this tax revenue in hopes that, well, I guess to make ourselves sustainable, to make ourselves financially stable. And then in turn, that's not sustainable to who? I mean, basically, before we had these agreements in place, when we weren't charging tax, there was $0 going back to the province. Now, from the taxes we're generating, we're making a lot of money that's going back to the province, and they're so kind to give us back some of it. So it's just so ironic to say it's not sustainable. That revenue wasn't there before. It's ours. We're sharing it. They're sharing it. We're trying to make ourselves sustainable, but that's not sustainable to our premier. So the only conclusion that I have in this statement is, well, what would be sustainable for him is that we all just fail, and we're at those high levels of poverty, and we don't advance anywhere. It's an awful conclusion.
It is, and I just want to state, it's so upsetting that we, as Indigenous people, that we are, this is our territory. They should be coming to us. We shouldn't have to bow down to what they're telling us. And we're a sovereign nation, so we need to start doing what is good for our people and start taking control. And building our governments and building our relationships with one another. A prime example, what upsets me the most is that our children, every child that goes to public school, we, the First Nation, have to pay. This coming fall, it's going to be up to $14,000 a child. Now, a regular New Brunswicker that lives outside of the community, they don't have to pay, but First Nations do. So we send all of our kids to school. We have to send, pay for these kids to go to, and then all we hear is discrimination into the school system because the school system is failing our kids. But yet we are paying. It's like we might as well send all of our kids to a private school or build our own Wolastoqey or Mi'kmaw high school and get all the kids in there together. That's what sort of frustrates me. Mm-hmm. It's all of the, as I spoke about earlier, which the public doesn't know, it's all about funding the shortfalls of our programs and services. House is the big one, as Chief Ward has mentioned. We struggle. First Nation people. One of the things is that poverty, for example. They say First Nations are the largest poverty in this country, in this province. We're trying to rectify that by putting our people to work. The people want to work because they've got a passion for the community. They want to see the success of the community. They want to see, it warms my heart when I look out my window and I see someone driving around the community with a brand new vehicle. They're doing well, and good for them, because you know what? Doing well is great for your mental health. And when you've got great, when people are focusing on their mental health and doing well, then you've got, really good successes coming out of that. And, this is an unfortunate situation where we have a premier in the middle of a pandemic that has added more stress onto our governing bodies in our community.
When Chief Sacha was speaking and about the revenue sharing and that this is ours and we're sort of sharing with the province, it's sort of like I have a soda pop in my hand and I say to you, Pam, can you hold this? Go ahead and take a sip and then give it back to me. That's exactly what it is. But what the premier's done is basically say, well, this pop is mine now. It was never the province's revenue to keep. It was based on keeping everything equalized on and off reserve, and administering it in a fair, equal manner. But you're just administering it for us for a slight fee and giving it back to us. Doesn't make it yours.
I think people are going to learn a lot from this conversation. And I know as we wrap up, the number one question people are going to have is, where do we go collectively as Mi'kmaw and Wolastoqey First Nations from here? What would you like to see in the future coming from the province?
I think the first thing that has to happen is the province has to take a step back and realize they acted too quickly. They acted without full knowledge of the actual agreements. And also, it's pretty disturbing to know that the Mi'kmaw have been trying to renegotiate their agreements, sort of what the Wolastoqey have done, and they've just basically been ignored. So that, everyone should be treated equally and fairly and have the same access, the same agreements, because the Mi'kmaw agreements have a termination of only 3 months. How do you renegotiate that when you have a deadline? That is 100% trying to negotiate with a gun to your head. And that creates a bit of panic. And I'm sure for some of these communities that say, whoa, if you're going to do this, we're going to be affected. These communities have investments, payments, and now they're just saying, come and deal with us, come and talk to us, otherwise it'll be pulled. That's not right. That is unconscionable in my view, because you can't do that. At least in the new agreements, there's 12 months notice. But even that requires planning. And what happens if we can't come to an agreement? The provinces in the past denied dispute resolution. It's their way or the highway. So how do you negotiate in that manner? It's just not appropriate and it's not right.
The government is asking us to come forward with our agreements and to open them up and to discuss them. Well, you know what? If they're not opening up their files when it comes to the cannabis file, or of course the selling of alcohol in our stores, there are specific companies in this province that are, belittling or of course going after the small folk and taking those licenses away. We're doing very successful in our community when it comes to the cannabis file, because, going back to the police, and we as a First Nation in the city of Fredericton has of course, a unique policing agreement with the city of Fredericton. So what that happens is create some gray areas between federal jurisdiction and of course municipality. So, we have our challenges there, but I just wanted to talk about the licensing that we don't have access to.
I always usually end off in optimism and say, for anyone watching today or for the viewers, become an ally, get educated a little bit, share the word, speak out, support us. We're not just a First Nation looking for handouts. We participate in the economy. We're us as an Eel River Bar in the northern New Brunswick area. We have a high percentage of our children who attend the local schools. Let's say if the Minor Hockey Association didn't have the numbers just from Eel River Bar alone, I have no doubt that there wouldn't be minor hockey in Dalhousie this year. We contribute to our local arena. We contribute to the Recreaplex. We contribute to breakfast programs. Just the hot lunches at school. We're the biggest purchaser of these lunches. If it wasn't for us, it wouldn't be feasible. There would be no lunches for anybody. We're an equal player in this economy, and in New Brunswick as a leader, I do not feel equal. I do not feel heard. The First Nations, it just that recognition, that friendly partnership.
Well, Chief Ward, we'll end off with you. What should the province be doing right now?
The province should be preparing something at least, because in recent CBC interviews, Higgs has mentioned that they haven't a plan or anything in place yet to even discuss what is going to happen after the taxation agreements expire, or what kind of form that would take. So, and he wants us to come to the table, but I'm 100% confident that they already have something predetermined and are going to throw it at us, in saying that, this is it or the highway. That's the nature of this province and everything that we've been dealing with them about. This is how they approach things. So some of us here in the Mi'kmaw communities have 90 days to come up with some sort of plan or to approach the premier. 90 days is not enough, especially for something this big, and the large impact it's going to have on the communities and the undue hardship we're all going to experience. So I think a lot of things are on the table for us right now, from litigation to I love what Chief Trish says about enforcing our own taxation regimes. There's a lot of different areas too that are unresolved with the province in forestry, mining, fishing, hunting. There's a lot of things there that the government didn't want to talk about in the past, but they did not want to litigate that as well. So, you know, a lot of these things, I don't think Premier Higgs has looked back and looked at, researched, or understood these things that were left in the past, but were not resolved. So I think that the government should really, you know, prepare themselves, take a step back, and come in good faith, or it can open up a lot of doors for other areas that may be difficult for them. So
I think divide and conquer is what the government is trying to do. And, you know, and you're speaking of, you know, just Chief Ward, and I'm thinking, you know, there's lots of young leaders today. And we look at the political parties on all spectrums, and no offense, you know, I'm going to be a senior Monday, but come on now, we need younger people, fresh minds, and to be in the times. If I could just may also add, if the government's looking for money, maybe they need to reevaluate the bilingualism in the province of New Brunswick. We're the only province in Canada that is bilingual, and they spend $100 million a year, you know, on bilingualism in this province. So they're looking for money. Maybe, you know, they should look at that file as well. I'm just trying to give some tips for the Premier, so maybe you can look at these coffers there.
What I'm hoping is that this session that we had here today will help educate not just Canadians in general, New Brunswickers in particular, help dispel all those myths and misinformation, but also hopefully the Premier and his government will actually hear from First Nation chiefs who are acting in good faith, always trying to work together in this treaty relationship, helping the people on the ground because of all of the poverty, all of the dispossession, all of the essentially legal blockades out of these industries that have kept us from moving forward. So I think what you've done here today will help really send those strong messages. And Wolastoqey, Woliwan, thank you, merci, all the chiefs for coming here today and helping to educate, because this is really about well-being for everybody, you know, First Nations as well as New Brunswickers. And I'll make sure to post links to all of your communities, your social media handles, some of the articles that have been written about this. And of course, we will follow it and make sure that we continue all collectively to put pressure on the province. And thank you to all of the podcast listeners, YouTube viewers, for tuning into the Warrior Life podcast and taking part, because this is about education for action. Remember, this is never just about information. Now that you know better, you all have an obligation to make sure that First Nations rights are respected, basic human rights, even to be able to enjoy our own lands and resources. So share this podcast, share the video, help spread the word, and pressure the Premier of New Brunswick to do what's right and come to the table in a good way, not a predetermined way, and hear what the chiefs have to say about all of our communities. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I really can't thank you enough.
Woliwan.
thank you.
Thanks.
Till next time, keep living a warrior life. Malalia.